Hi, everybody. My name is Megan Pletzer. I'm a product manager here at DQ, and I'm responsible for our DevTools Mobile product. So today I will be talking about the next generation of that product. So as we've seen in a lot of these XCon talks, there's a lot of complexity in the mobile app accessibility field, and we really want to make it as easy as possible for you to find and fix accessibility issues in your mobile apps. So we're really striving for that mission of digital equality across the mobile app space. So we've evolved our tools over the last year pretty significantly, really to enable as many teams and as many people as possible to test their apps for accessibility. So whether you have a lot of accessibility knowledge, our tools can help speed things up for you. And if you only have a little or no accessibility knowledge, our tools are really here to help provide the guidance that you need. So I'll go into a lot of that detail and do some demoing as well. And then I will spend at the end a little bit of time talking about access trusted results for mobile. How do we ensure that we're providing you with meaningful mobile accessibility issues? So you're spending your time fixing issues that matter and that will really make a difference for your end users. So as we dive in here, just a reminder of what we're here to talk about today. I'm showing two things up on screen. So on the left, I'm showing the mobile web, and I've got a phone and it has the target.com website loaded. And in this case, that content is being rendered as HTML in a mobile browser. And just to clarify, that's not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about is what's shown on the right, which is mobile apps. So I've got the target app now on a phone in that image there. And that content is rendered as native views. And that's what we're talking about. DevTools Mobile allows you to test those native apps for native or cross-platform apps now for accessibility issues. So let's dive right in. Over the last year, like I said, we've had a lot of exciting updates. So I want to just share with you why and how we've evolved our mobile app testing tools here at DQ. One thing that's really important to us, and especially towards that mission of digital equality, is that we can allow you with our tools to test every app. And if we look at this Google Trends chart here showing search interest over time in certain terms related to app development technology, we can see interest growing in recent years for cross-platform apps, app technology. So things like React Native, which is the yellow line, Flutter, the green line, and .NET MAUI, the purple line. And we can also see search interest in some of the newer UI technologies for native iOS and native Android. So we've got Swift UI as the blue line for iOS, and then Jetpack Compose as the red line for Android. So here at DQ, as we've been monitoring and seeing how these cross-platform app technologies are taking off and how some of these newer UI technologies on the native side are important as well, we wanted to make sure that we can scan any app, regardless of how it was built, for accessibility issues. And as of last year, we can now say that if you can run your app on iOS or Android, you can test it with DevTools Mobile. So this now includes cross-platform apps, so the React Native, Flutter, .NET MAUI, like I mentioned before, and really we're ready for whatever comes next. So other cross-platform technologies that come out, we'll be ready to scan those as well based on how we've refactored our tool. We continue to support native iOS apps, both UIKit and Swift UI. We have improved our support for Swift UI over the last year, and also native Android apps we support, so XML and Jetpack Compose, and similarly, we've added increased support for Jetpack Compose. So we're really ready to scan your mobile app regardless of how you've built it. The other thing we wanted to do was ensure that we could provide accessibility testing options without any code that needed to be embedded into your app. Previous versions of our product did require you to embed some code, and now you no longer need to do that. So how are we actually testing it if we don't have anything in your app itself? It's black box testing, so we're essentially analyzing your app from the outside in. We're testing the fully rendered UI with the accessibility layer loaded, and we're analyzing the view hierarchy as it's exposed both to the user and to the assistive technology. So the view hierarchy is, I've got an example of that in an image on the left on this slide, and it's just kind of a nested tree view being shown of the different views that are being rendered on screen on the device. So we're in a position where we can analyze the app. We've got the elements are all fully loaded. We know the position and the size of them, where a user would find and interact with them, and we have access to all the properties in the accessibility layer. So things like accessibility traits, is the view accessibility focusable? Is it an accessibility element? We can use all of those things to confidently make an accessibility assessment. The other thing we wanted to ensure is that we're doing our accessibility testing as close to the end user experience as possible. So one way that we do that is what I just showed, where we're looking at the view hierarchy, because that's informing what's directly displayed on screen. But there's actually times where it's important to analyze the pixels themselves that are being rendered on the device, as opposed to a static source code analysis or analyzing that view hierarchy. And so I'll give you one example of that here. We've started to use computer vision to do just that, to analyze those pixels on the screen to make good assessments. And one example is color contrast. So I have a phone up here on the screen. It has a blue background, kind of 3 striped bars. At the top, it's a lighter blue. In the middle, it's a medium blue. And at the bottom, it's more of a navy. And then there's a floating button at the bottom of the screen. And the floating button has navy text, and then it has a white background. But the white background actually has its opacity reduced to 60%. So what's happening then in reality is that the white does not appear white on screen because it's being shown over a navy background. So you're getting kind of like this muddy blue-gray color instead. So if you were to use a traditional method of checking for color contrast by looking at those values in the source code, you might take the text color of navy and the button color of white, but you don't really have a good way to know what to do with that 60% opacity because you don't know what's behind that button. But with computer vision, we can actually look at the pixels on the screen. I used a color picker just to grab what that kind of muddy blue color actually is, and I'm showing that hex value up here on screen. But now we can actually assess that rendered button color as the background and the actual text color pixel value at the foreground and get a really good color contrast analysis. The other thing that's great about using computer vision in this particular rule is that it can detect text no matter what type of text it is. So real text that you can actually highlight and copy paste, or it could be text that's in an image, like in a JPEG or in a PNG. The computer vision rule will find that. So another thing we wanted to do as well was ensure that our tools could offer accessibility testing for everyone. So no matter where you sit on your team or what your role is, we wanted to ensure that you can use DevTools Mobile to test for accessibility. So what I'm going to do is talk through the components of the product and kind of who they're best suited for on your team. And then I'll head into demo mode and I'll show you some of the stuff live here. So the first component, if we think about QA, UX, product owners, really anyone can use our DevTools Mobile Analyzer. So this is new as of last year, and it's a way to test without any access to the source code. Developers can use it too. I'll actually show you how it's a pretty great tool for developers as well. But the key benefit to this is that anyone can get up and running with this without needing to have any development experience or any development time needed. On all of these slides where I am showing some of our products, just a note here, I do have a QR code if you want to try our free 14-day trial, or you can go to dq.com/try-mobile. You get full access to the product. You don't have to put your credit card in or anything. So it's a really great way to try it out and see how it works. You could, test your own app and kind of see what sort of results you get. So another group of people on your team might be test automation engineers or developers responsible for writing your UI tests. And for that, we have the DevTools Mobile SDKs. So that allows you to add accessibility checks right into those automated UI tests. We've supported XUI tests in Espresso for a while now. And then over the course of the last year, we added support for UI Automator for Android. And we've really improved our Appium support. We actually just released last week an exciting update for Appium, where we no longer need you to embed any code in your app. Instead, what we have is an Appium plugin. So as of Appium 2, you can have server plugins installed that can offer you additional functionality. And so we have a server plugin that will unlock that accessibility testing functionality. It doesn't matter how you've written your Appium tests. Any Appium client will work with this Appium plugin that we have for you. So I'll demo that as well. And then another kind of more specific group of people on your team, if you are a React Native developer, we, over the course of the last year, started to offer code linting as an option. So either in VS Code, if you use VS Code, you can have a code linter that's spotting accessibility issues right as you type before you even commit your code, or you can add some code linting capabilities into your pipeline, which I'll show you as well. So before I go into demo mode, let's just talk about how all these tools might fit into your process. If we look at this kind of generic, very overly genericized process for a build flow, You've got a develop phase as the first phase on the left. Then you've got a build phase where your code is in your pipeline. And then you have a test phase where you have people actually testing maybe on real devices before you're actually pushing that out to production. So in the develop phase as a developer, one tool you can use is that mobile analyzer that I mentioned. So that's a way that you can test just screen by screen. So if you're working on a screen, you can test that screen before you go ahead and commit your code. Or you can add, if you're doing a React Native app, you can use our linter for React Native as a developer. In the build phase then, for test automation engineers, that's where our mobile SDKs come in. So that's where you can add that test automation into your pipeline so that you just have accessibility tests constantly running at the points that you dictate in your pipeline. And you can also add linting and automated linting in your pipeline as well. And then in the far right phase there, the test phase, where someone's coming in to do some QA or some manual testing, that's a great place to use the mobile analyzer to really speed up and enhance any accessibility testing that's happening, or to add accessibility testing if it's not happening there already. All right, so now that I've talked through the tools, I actually want to go ahead and show them to you. I'm going to start with the mobile analyzer. So if you remember, that was something that could be used by a developer during development, or by a tester once there's a release candidate or something that's been released onto some devices for testing. So I'll kind of talk through both of those as I show the demo here. So I'm going to start on Android. I have an Android emulator here running. And you'll see this purple floating action button. And this would work on an emulator or on a physical Android device. And this is the Axe DevTools Mobile Analyzer running on this device, this button. And what's really cool is this button actually follows you around the device. You can see that it's present no matter where I go. And I can scan any screen on the device for accessibility issues. So I tapped the button, and then I can see at the bottom of the screen, it says scan complete. So I know now that I've sent my scan with all of my issues that were found out to the mobile dashboard. So we offer a web-based mobile dashboard where all the results for your team are centralized in one location, so you can easily collaborate and share those results. But before I show you, I'll hop over and show you what the results look like. Let me just talk a little bit more about how I got this on this emulator. So we offer from the Google Play Store a app. It's the Axe Accessibility Analyzer. And once you install it, this is the app itself. It's pretty basic because mostly what you want is access to this button that'll follow you everywhere, but there's a few things in the app here itself. But once you install the app, what you get in your accessibility settings on your device is the ability to turn Axe on and off, because that app, as it was installed, essentially added an accessibility service on the device. So it has device-wide permissions to float that button over everything and take scans of whatever you need. So I could, if I'm testing this app, I could navigate to another screen and hit the button again, and it would take a new scan. But let's take a look at what that actually looks like then, what the results look like. So this is our mobile dashboard. I'm going to hit refresh so I can see my latest scan that I just took. And here's the scan I just took while I was talking. So if I click on the number of issues, which was 6 issues found, and I open it up, I get a count of my issues, and they're broken down by severity. This can help me prioritize if I want to just check out maybe the critical issues first. But I'll actually just click in and look at all 6. And then what I see is on the left, my screenshot at the time I took the scan, and on the right, I have my issues that were found. And so I can click into any of these issues, and I can use the highlight button to highlight in my screenshot on the left with this red box, the issue that was found. You also have a lot of information presented to you to help you understand why it was an issue. So in this case, we're looking at color contrast, and we can see the background color, the foreground color, the calculated color contrast ratio, as well as a description of why this didn't pass. There's not enough contrast there with this text against the background. And something that's really helpful, especially if you're newer to accessibility or you don't have a lot of accessibility knowledge, is that you can always click this more info on this issue link. And it takes you out to our docs site where you can find a lot of information about that issue, as well as find code samples for how you can fix the issue. So we show you which WCAG criteria we evaluated against, the impact, and this one doesn't have code samples because it's color contrast, but if we take a look at another one, for example, you can see there's code samples out here that you can easily copy paste back into your app, or to give you a sense for the type of code change that might be required in your app. So this is something that I could have run as a developer maybe before I committed my code, but if I was a tester and I was testing later in the process, I might need to send this issue over to a developer or to my development team. And there's always a link to copy. So I can easily copy a link that a developer can then open and come back to the same view and have all this rich information at their disposal to help fix the issue. One last really quick thing before I switch over to the next part of the demo is you can use this inspect feature too, which is a really great way to see the entire view hierarchy at the time of the scan. So this allows you to drill into any of the elements on the screen and take a look in more detail at the properties to understand the child-parent relationships between those views. Sometimes that can be helpful when you're troubleshooting a tricky accessibility issue. So that was the way you would capture a scan on Android. What I'd like to show you now is how you can do the same thing in iOS. So in iOS, it's a little bit different. We don't have that same freedom to have an app on an iOS device that kind of has free reign over the device to take scans of the screen. So instead, what we've done is used an Xcode project that you can, if you have an DevTools Mobile license, you have access to this DevTools Mobile Analyzer Xcode project, which is what I'm showing up here on the screen. And so I'll talk about this from a developer perspective first, and then I'll switch and talk about how you could use this as a tester as well. So as a developer, I would have let me open my actual code here that I'm working on. So as a developer, I would have my code open for my app that I'm writing. In this example, it's this chic boutique app over here on the right in my simulator. And I'm working on the search bar view today in this example. And if I want to check that for accessibility before I commit my code, what I would do is I would also have a second Xcode project open. So there's no code, no DQ code in my app itself, but I do have this second Xcode project open, and that's how I'm going to scan my app that I'm working on in my simulator. So there's a couple quick setup things. I have my API key here, and I also have a bundle ID for this app that I'm about to test. But beyond that, I don't need to do anything else other than get my app to the screen that I want to for testing, and then hit this play button up here in Xcode. So hitting that play button is very similar to hitting that purple floating action button that we saw in the Android example. And so we don't see too much on the device while it's actually testing, but it is taking a scan of that screen. And then once it's finished, it'll tell us at the bottom here that the test has succeeded, and we'll be able to head out to the mobile dashboard and take a look at that as well. So we'll just give it a second to fire up. So now that test has succeeded. So I should be able to head back out to my dashboard, and we should see that one here too. So here's our home screen. We can see we have 8 issues here on the iOS version of our app. We're not doing quite as well as the Android team, which only had 6. We found 8 things in our iOS app. But again, we have the ability to click through the issues, highlight them on the screen, and remediate them in just the same way. So that was a kind of a development workflow. I do want to share with you then how you might do this as a tester. So as a tester, you won't have access to the source code, and that's okay. So we'll just close that window. But you will still use this Xcode project. And you won't be running your app on a simulator, most likely. You might be, but most likely you'll have a physical device. And so it's really easy by using Xcode to actually connect to your physical device. I have my phone connected right now via Wi-Fi, but I can just pick my device up here in Xcode, and I can then, on my device itself, navigate to the screen that I want to test and come out here and hit this play button again, and then it'll take a scan of that screen that's actually showing on my live device. The reason that we are doing it this way through Xcode is because there is this really great way that you can manage your devices for testing if you use this automatic signing checkbox. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second, but I just wanted to show you that there's this one checkbox during setup that will have you check, and it unlocks a lot of power within Xcode to really streamline your device management as part of your testing process. So let me actually head back over to my presentation then so I can talk about that a little bit more. So you did see that the Android implementation of the analyzer and the iOS implementation are a bit different. And so the reason that we did that is really to take advantage of the strengths of each platform. They're just different ecosystems in general. So on the Android side, it's really, they make black box testing like we're doing now really easy. You can turn X on and off from the settings as needed, and then you get that floating action button, all controlled by that accessibility service. On the iOS side, black box testing is just a little bit trickier. There's some things you need to honor to make sure everything in Apple's trust chain is working properly. So the first is that you need to be using Xcode. Even if you're using like maybe a desktop app or something else to access your device or run a scan, behind the scenes, Xcode is required. It's kind of a non-negotiable piece of this. You need a certificate installed on your Mac. And then you also need that physical device that you're using, your phone or your iPad, registered with the Apple Developer Program account. What's really great, though, is that checkbox that I showed you in Xcode actually gets rid of these last two requirements. So if you check that automatic signing box in Xcode, all you need to do is connect your device to Xcode and you can start testing. You don't have to install a certificate, and you don't need to register that device with the Apple Developer Program account, which is really helpful, especially when you think about if you have a large team with a lot of devices or a lot of different people doing testing. The ability to test on any device without having to jump through a bunch of hoops for certificates and things like that is really useful. So that's why we really went with this Xcode route. If you are a tester and you're maybe not as familiar with Xcode, I've helped a number of UX people, testers get up and running. It's really easy to set up. Working in that file is really just like working in like a document editor. You add a few values and hit save. So once you get yourself set up, it's a really easy process to follow. So let me now switch gears. So that was kind of the more manual approach, going screen by screen and taking a scan of your app. We also offer those mobile SDKs that I mentioned, and that's to add in that middle phase of your build process, is to add that testing right into your pipeline itself. So I'm going to go back to my demo here. I'm going to stick in iOS mode for now, and I'm going to go back to being a developer or an test automation engineer. And so I'm going to open my app back up. So what you can do to add accessibility testing into your UI tests is include the libraries that we provide, those SDKs. So I'm going to show this on iOS. It's very similar how you would set this up for either Espresso or UI Automator on the Android side. This is XCUI on iOS here, but essentially I'm going to import the DevTools XCUI framework. I'm going to call Axe. I'm going to log in with my API key. That's just something that you get when you have your mobile license. And then I'm in our test here, we have a test for Happy Path accessibility. I'm going to run an accessibility scan at a number of key points. So you can see I have this function scan for accessibility, and it's repeated 4 times. So essentially it's going to run once for each of these 4 tabs that are across the bottom of the app that we're going to scan. I'm actually going to kick this off so we can see it start to run as I talk through this. I'm going to hit my test button here. And what we should see is over here on the right, the app will relaunch as this test starts. And then it will run a scan for accessibility on the home screen. And then it will move on. So here we've got it launching. It's going to scan for accessibility here. And then we'll see it actually navigate. It's going to issue a tap on this catalog button at the bottom and navigate to that screen and then run a test there as well. And what's happening in that scan for accessibility function that we have in our test here is really pretty simple. It's calling axe.run, which is running accessibility tests on everything that's on the screen. And then there's 2 options. It can either post the results to the mobile dashboard, which I'll show you. We'll just see those appear there, or you can save the results locally. So it looks like it's finished. It's all the way to the profile screen. So let's just hop back, test succeeded, and take a look at the dashboard where we should see those results have shown up now. So we can see each of those 4 scans, home, catalog, cart, and profile, have now been pushed to our mobile dashboard. If you're running this as part of a pipeline, and I'll show you an example of how that might look in a pull request here, you might want to actually save your results locally, or you might want to do things like check for how many accessibility issues were found and then do something with those results. Maybe you actually fail that UI test and prevent a pull request from merging in that case. So let me just show a quick example of that. We've used GitHub Actions here to run those same tests that I just showed as part of when a pull request is opened. And so in this case, those tests failed. And so what we've done is saved those results locally in the pipeline environment and we have a tool that you can use to bundle those up and create a nice shareable HTML report. In the interest of time, I won't open this up today, but we've attached it then as an artifact. It has all the same information you would get on the dashboard, but it's this nice self-contained artifact that can be reviewed by anyone who's looking at this pull request. The other thing I'd like to show on the automation side is what the new functionality that we've recently introduced for Appium. So I'm going to stay in iOS again here. But I'm going to show you the basics of Appium. If you're not familiar, there's an Appium server that runs. There's also an Appium client, which is where your tests are written, and then they're interacting with your device to run the tests. And so what we have now is we have an Appium a plugin for the Appium server. And so I'm going to show you, I'm going to start Appium up here in this terminal window with our plugin installed. And so I'm just going to do this kind of real briefly, go through this. But you can see here our plugin is active. And then what we do within our Appium test itself, in order to make sure that we can run an accessibility scan, is there's some capabilities that we need to set. A lot of these are standard capabilities in any Appium test, but we do also ask you to provide your DevTools Mobile API key. And then once you have that, basically you can go through your existing Appium tests, and any place that you want to add an accessibility scan, you can just call get page source. So get page source will go out and actually run the scan and post it to our dashboard and return those results to you. So I'll actually run that here. So I've got just got my client I can run down here. So we'll see the server is busy in the background. We saw it launched the app over here on the right, and it's taking that accessibility scan, posting it to the dashboard. And it actually did also post my results right here in terminal for me as well. But we can also then go back out to the dashboard and see that that Appium scan made its way here as well. So here's that scan that I just took of that screen. So again, same thing, results we can highlight, get all the remediation advice that we need. But that's really a great way if your team is using Appium to be able to add accessibility testing into your UI tests that you might already have. And then I know I'm going through a lot here, but I'm going to show one more thing. The last thing I'm going to show is React Native linting. So like I mentioned, we did also add this capability last year. I'm going to hop over through a few screens here over to VS Code. So we've had for a while an Axe accessibility linter, and what we added last year was the ability for you to actually lint your React Native code. So if you install this is a free extension that you can get for VS Code. If you install that, and you in your Axe linter YAML file, you specify that you want to lint React Native code, then in your React Native files themselves, you can start getting feedback on any accessibility issues that you've introduced. So I can see here that I have an image with a red squiggly line, meaning I have a problem. I get a nice tooltip telling me what the problem is. In this case, I've said this is accessible. It's an accessible image, but I don't have my accessibility label. So if I actually add a label, just for now, I'll put fake text in there, but now my linting error goes away. So it's a really great way to have that immediate feedback and find accessibility issues in your React Native apps before you've even committed that code. The other thing you can do with the linting as well is include that in your pipeline. So I've got an example here of using GitHub Actions where we ran the linter on the code that was pushed, and you can see there's actually the linting errors. Then I can find that one that's similar to what I just looked at. The linting errors are provided right in line in this pull request. So the pull request reviewer has a really easy way to take a look at this. So let me hop back now to my presentation mode. And let's just talk a little bit more about Axe. In your testing process, I just want to maybe have a shout out for a best practice that I would recommend, something for you to consider. I talked about kind of those three phases: develop, build, and test. And what I think often happens is that there's also kind of a fourth phase, which is the fix phase. And so a tester has found some things. They were caught during the manual testing. Maybe they were using the mobile analyzer, and you as a developer now have an issue to fix. And so there's a number of things that you need to do. You've got to check out that branch where the issue is found. You've got to reproduce the issue, fix the issue, and then send it back to your tester, possibly to verify. And it's a lot of context switching. You might be working on something entirely different that day, and then you're pulling up a bug in a different branch, and there's just kind of a lot of back and forth there with the tester as well. So my plug here, my recommendation is really to think about shifting that fixing as far left as you can. So as a developer, develop and fix together at the same time. So find your accessibility issues before you've even committed your code. It'll save you that back and forth time with the tester. It'll save you the time of switching between branches and trying to reproduce old issues. And running an accessibility scan on a screen before you commit your code should be a really quick and painless exercise. And really, so not only does it save you as the developer time, it does save your whole team time as well, because the tester doesn't have to find the issue and communicate it to you. There doesn't have to be a ticket written that a product owner prioritizes. Kind of all those things that go into that process can be streamlined if you move the fixing as far left as possible. And then to take that even one step further, this is the diagram I showed before of how DevTools Mobile fits into your build process, your dev process. There's one other tool that we have here at DQ that I think might be really beneficial when you think about the entirety of an app development process and team. And it's not part of DevTools Mobile, it's a separate tool. It's a free tool called X for Designers. So I'm showing that now as the first step of this dev process. And I'd really recommend that you check it out. It's a way that you can get some early feedback on the accessibility before you've even handed designs to your dev team. So there's things like color contrast, target size, all these things can be tested for. It's a free plugin for Figma. And there's also this really cool feature where you can annotate your design. So you're giving really good details about how you'd like certain things related to accessibility to be built once it gets into development. So you can kind of provide some guidance way up here in the design phase instead of finding things later if you're responsible for testing in the testing phase. All right, so let me then switch gears a little bit. And I just want to close by talking a little bit about Axe's trusted results for mobile. So when I say results, I mean the accessibility issues that we find. That list of issues, whether it's color contrast or target size, those things that we're finding when we scan your app. And so just to revisit the concept of mobile web versus mobile apps, because it is important here. On the mobile web, where you have a website displayed on a phone in a web browser or a mobile browser, those web accessibility concepts apply pretty directly. It's HTML, and so we can really follow the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, pretty closely. When we're looking at mobile apps, those web accessibility concepts need to be interpreted. So we're looking at that view hierarchy. There's no HTML present, and a lot of WCAG is very specific for web and HTML. So there's a layer of interpretation that needs to happen. We've talked about this before, probably in some other talks too, but just to remind you that there's no WCAG success criteria that's specific to mobile. So like I said, it's really written for HTML. There's guidelines for mobile, but they're not requirements. So the Mobile Accessibility Task Force and WCAG 2 ICT Task Force both offer help and guidance in applying it to mobile apps, but there's nothing as a definitive requirement like there is for the web. One of our Android team members is actually on this WCAG 2 ICT force here at DQ, which is pretty cool. So there's other places you can find mobile accessibility guidelines as well. So we have Apple's Human Interface Guidelines. We have the Android Developer Accessibility Guide. And then Apps Foundation is a nonprofit, and they offer a lot of great resources, free resources out on their website as well. So there's all these different places that we can get guidance on how we should create a mobile rule set, or what we should test for mobile app accessibility. And because of that, when you're looking at different testing tools like DevTools Mobile, that rule set can really vary. So the different tools in the mobile area are testing different things, sometimes quite wildly different, because that rule set is made up of three things. There's the interpretation of WCAG. There's best practices from Google or Apple that might be included, and sometimes a company might even include their own best practices. We actually use all three of these here at DQ for our mobile rule set. But what I wanted to share with you is just an example of how sometimes that can go a little bit wrong, or it can lead to problems when you're trying to review your results if these rule sets aren't created very carefully. And all the rule sets out there are very well-meaning. It's just a very complex field for mobile app accessibility. And so it is tricky to get all the mobile rules working in a way that really is going to give you results that are worth your time to spend fixing and that accurately map to WCAG criteria. So I'm just going to show you two visual examples of some rule set things that you should maybe look out for. So the first one would be an inaccurate best practice. So you might have a rule set that flags a button because it contains an emoji. We've got a let's go button shown with a fist bump emoji. And our experts here would not flag this as an accessibility issue. It actually gets read aloud as let's go oncoming fist. Oncoming fist might seem a little scary, but if you're used to listening to emojis out loud, it's really just accurately describing what you're seeing there on screen. And so this really isn't an accessibility problem for people. So if a tool is giving you this as a result, you either waste your time fixing it or you spend mental energy ignoring it every time it comes up in the result set. And then one other example is a rule set might have an inaccurate WCAG interpretation. So what I'm showing here on screen is a button and it says shop now in all lowercase. And if a rule, or if the tool tells you that this maps to WCAG criteria 3.1.6 pronunciation, you might have a false sense of security that you've covered pronunciation with your testing. In fact, that's not quite the right mapping for this example. We wouldn't here at DQ flag this as a pronunciation issue. Pronunciation is really two words, they're spelled the same, but they're pronounced differently. So record or record. I think what this is maybe getting at is that if you would capitalize shop in shop now, the inflection might have been better when read aloud by a screen reader. So here at DQ with our Axe DevTools mobile rule set, we try really, we put a lot of due diligence into making sure that our rules are very high quality and that the results you're getting, you can really trust. So we do have our own interpretation of WCAG that's backed by our over 20 years of experience in digital accessibility. What's been really cool working here that I've experienced is having our development team and our accessibility professionals working together on the development of those rules. Really two completely separate areas of expertise coming together to create really good mobile accessibility testing rules. We do look at best practices from Google or Apple as well. And then we do include in our rules some of our in-house accessibility experts' best practices. So if you were to give us your app for a manual audit and our accessibility consultants would test for something manually, there's some of those rules that we've included in our tool as well. So what does that mean? It just really means that we are finding only real accessibility issues, things that we really think you should spend your time, your developer time, your tester time finding and fixing. And we believe that if you fix these, they will make a significant impact to that experience for your end users. And it also means that our commitment to zero false positives is part of our trusted results as well. So we do a lot of due diligence when we're creating new rules. We test them out in an experimental phase for a while before we promote them to full-blown rules to make sure that we're not giving you any extra noise in your result set. Sometimes people say, well, it'd be okay if you just run a whole bunch of rules and I'll look through the results and decide what is a false positive and what isn't. If you're in that camp, the one thing that can be tricky is if you're not an accessibility expert, you might not actually know what's a false positive and what's not. So we really just want to make sure that we take all of that question out of the mix for you and we give you results where there's no false positives included. And then lastly, as I showed in one example with that color vision or the color contrast rule, with computer vision, we do enhance some of our rules with machine learning to make sure they're even more accurate and providing more results where we can. So just a reminder before I wrap up here is that we do have a free 14-day trial. So if you want to try it out, you can use this QR code that I've got up on screen, or you can go to dq.com/try-mobile. And thanks for listening today. I'm looking forward to getting into the questions here. So I'll hand it back over to Rachel.
Yes, thank you. Wonderful session, Megan. Great talk, and thank you for sharing all this information about Axe DevTools Mobile. Before we kick off our Q&A, because there's lots of questions coming in and people upvoting and everything, I did want to mention I actually used to be part of the Axe DevTools Mobile development team, so it's kind of eager for me to answer all these questions, but I want to let Megan shine. So I may chime in here and there because I know some things too, but yeah, let's kick it off. So one of the questions that we had come in that was pretty highly upvoted is, what kinds of accessibility issues does Axe DevTools Mobile test for?
That's a good question. And actually, if I can get my screen share to show up again, I'll actually have a slide. If you look at these slides afterwards, I did include a resources section because I knew I might run out of time. So I included some extra goodies at the end. But I do have a list here that talks about some of the basic checks that we run, as well as some of the more advanced checks. And I've broken it up that way because there's a lot of good free tools out there that do these basic checks as well. So I wanted to kind of clearly identify where Axe does those checks, and then we also have some more advanced checks as well. But color contrast is a big one, target size, making sure that any input control, so any form element has an accessible name, images have descriptions, and really ensuring that if you're using assistive technology, it can get to all the static text and it can get to execute all of the actions. So those are kind of the basic core accessibility checks that we do. And then on top of that, we are, adding additional things. So like I showed, we're actually able to detect color contrast for images of text using that computer vision. We implemented the WCAG 2.2 rule recently for target spacing. So making sure that hit areas aren't too close together so you don't accidentally hit one as opposed to another. And a number of other things like, do you have a screen title? Are you supporting screen rotation? You're not nesting interactive controls. And there's a lot more to there. just to make sure that we're really testing for extra things that might trip users up. So we do have quite a robust and long rule set that we're testing for.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Megan. And I did hear you mention we test for target size, which I think relates to one of our other questions that we had come in regarding any rules that test for WCAG 2.2 success criteria.
Yeah, so that is the one that we recently introduced was touch target size. What we call it it's touch target spacing as well. So it's testing for it's not the AAA level that our target size rule is targeting, which is the 44 by 44, but we're looking at the new 2.2 rule. So it's a slightly smaller target size, but it's also ensuring that there's enough spacing between elements. So we did recently release that. That was experimental for a while before 2.2 was released, and we kind of made sure it was doing a really good job at finding those issues. And then we promoted it to a full-blown rule last fall.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. All right, kind of switching gears, we had a question about the Android application. And with the Axe Android Analyzer, are there any ways to interact with the Axe button without using drag and drop?
You can't, that's a really good question. You can use that completely using using a keyboard control or an assistive technology to reach that button and actually tap on it. I don't, it's a really good question actually that you're asking if you can move it around the screen. I'll actually have to test that a little bit, but you can activate and trigger it using assistive technology. It'll read aloud appropriately to you the action that's about to be triggered. I don't know, Rachel, actually, if you did any testing with it in that regard.
Yeah, I haven't actually, but I'm guessing that this question comes from actually the 2.2 success criteria regarding dragging movements.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of an interesting one, right? Because the dragging movement isn't necessarily always required. We have that capability in case the button is in the way, if you need to use other controls to navigate. But as you mentioned, you should be able to successfully use assistive technologies to kind of get around that. And so even if the floating button is on top of an element, you can still get to it like a navigation element. You should be able to still get to it with assistive technologies like switch access, keyboard, talkback. But I think that would be something interesting for us to look at implementing if there's a way that we can have the feature to move it around without using an assistive technology, maybe some additional buttons or something that don't require the dragging movement.
We might be able to do a little better there.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you to Morgan for asking that question. And then another question we had coming in from Irfan, how long is the trial period available for if we want to evaluate whether the product meets our requirements? Do you offer a single license purchase option, or is it only available at the enterprise level?
Good question. So it is a 14-day trial, so you can have a full 2 weeks. And right now we do ask you to contact us and talk about licensing for your team. So we don't have an individual license at the moment, but we definitely will work with you and your team to figure out how many licenses you need. And so we really just encourage you. There's a contact us form on our website where you can go out there, fill out a few key pieces of information, and we can be in touch about getting you hooked up with a license.
Yeah. All right. Another one. This is more of an accessibility question and less a question about the tool itself. But for modals on Android devices, how can you ensure that the focus stays inside of the modal when a screen reader is on or off?
Oh, that's probably a question that is actually outside of my area of expertise. I don't know, Rachel, if you actually would be able to answer that or if it's a good one for Discord later.
Yeah, that might be a good one for Discord later. We can get some of our Android devs in on it. I would say it is a big problem, though, with focus being on multiple levels in Android apps due to the way that activities get layered on top of each other. So yeah, I think that'd be a great one to dig into on Discord with our Android developers.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah. All right. Another one coming in. Can we use the iOS version in a virtual environment on Windows? So I'm guessing Derek is asking this question, and they're using a Windows machine to emulate a Mac virtual environment. Is probably what they're doing. Have we tested around with that at all?
So we have not tested it. I would imagine if you're running some kind of virtual Mac and you have Xcode installed and you can run a simulator that you should be fine. But it would be something to try out. Because if you're able to kind of run that whole Mac OS environment, I think you would be all set up to run the analyzer that way.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe the only thing that might get tripped up is if you're trying to connect a physical device. There may be some extra barriers there.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think using an emulator or a simulator in iOS context, I think should probably work
Yeah.
just fine. Well, a couple more questions coming in. William is asking if this could be used on services that host cloud devices, something like Sauce Labs, maybe.
Yes, most definitely. We are actively working on testing on as many of those platforms as possible, but we do have examples out in our documentation of how you can use some of those services, especially the automated testing side. But we are also working on options for being able to use that mobile analyzer, that more manual approach on devices that are hosted in a device cloud. So we really want to enable teams to be able to do that. It's important because it's a part of a lot of app testing team processes.
Just looking through here to see if there's any last more questions while we've got a couple minutes. I did see one come in regarding the percentage of errors that the tool fixes or is able to detect, which I know this isn't as straightforward of an answer as we have for web, but maybe you can speak to a little bit about why that's not as quite of a straightforward answer.
Yeah. So one exciting thing is that because our tool previously required that you embed some code into your app, we haven't been able to run a coverage study like.
Oh no, Megan's frozen. Is that just on my end? All right, looks like Megan dropped out, but I can speak to a little bit about this coverage question and maybe she'll be able to reconnect. I know there's nationwide. Oh, there you are,
Okay,
Megan.
am I back now? I'm sorry. I think I just totally lost my connection. Okay.
Yeah, I think
you Do you want to finish, Rachel? If you were answering it, I don't want to repeat what you've already said.
No, go ahead. We only caught the very beginning of what you were going to say. So
okay.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that we are excited because we will be doing a coverage study to get an idea of percentage of total issues found, but it's a little bit different than saying what is your WCAG percentage coverage, which isn't almost as important because really what you want to know is of all the issues I have on a screen, regardless of which WCAG criteria they are. A lot of them might fall into 10 WCAG criteria out of all of them, for example. So we really want to know that if most of my issues are in 10 WCAG criteria, I still want to know how many issues is the tool catching of those, of all the issues that could be found. So we are working on a study for that. So we'll have a better definitive answer for mobile because there just is no direct mapping to be able to say how much of the WCAG standard we cover because not all of the WCAG criteria apply to mobile. That's what I was attempting to say before I got cut off there.
Yes, thank you, Megan. It's a great explanation. You explained it just as well as I could have for sure. So I'm glad your connection came back in. We've got time for maybe one more question here, and it's actually one that I didn't actually see come in through the chat, but it's one that I've heard people asking some of our clients and prospects regarding hybrid applications. I know you mentioned cross-platform and how DevTools Mobile can test for Flutter and .NET MAUI and React Native, but what about something that has a lot of web views like Ionic or Cordova?
Yep. So we actually really strongly recommend that if you're building a true hybrid app where it's 100% web view, all of your content is being contained in a web view that's then presented to the user, that you do use our HTML testing tools. So you use the browser extension or you use the HTML APIs because that's going to really give you the best rule coverage on that HTML content. It's going to be able to tell you errors for things like ARIA attributes, things that our mobile tool just isn't testing for because it's not relevant to the mobile views, the native mobile views, but it is super relevant to HTML. So we actually have a lot of people who kind of take a hybrid approach where they use the HTML tools on their mobile apps for those web views. If they do have some native views that they're rendering, they might use the mobile tool on those views as well. But really to use the best testing tool for the type of view that you're testing is what we recommend.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that, Megan. And with that, I think we'll wrap up for today's session.